Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, May 21st, 2025, we're going to tackle a really crucial topic, onshoring.
That's right.
We're specifically digging into how American entrepreneurs right now can actually play a vital role in boosting our national security, bringing critical manufacturing back home to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, if you're running a business, I get it. National security might seem like this huge macro level thing, maybe a bit distant.
Yeah, it can feel that way.
But trust me, there's a really powerful connection here. Your entrepreneurial drive, your innovations, they can directly contribute to a stronger, more secure America.
Absolutely. And our mission today is really to map out those specific avenues for you, the opportunities. We have spent a lot of time digging into the latest data.
What kind of data are we talking about?
Oh, everything from trade figures, industry reports, workforce projections, looking across a whole range of vital sectors.
Okay.
And the goal is to equip you, the listener, the busy entrepreneur, with clear, actionable insights. Think of this as your shortcut, really.
A shortcut to understanding where your skills, your innovations, can fit into these onshoring efforts that are, well, frankly, essential now.
Exactly. Essential for our national well-being. We're trying to cut through all the complexity, give you focused information you can use quickly so you can see the landscape, without feeling totally buried under spreadsheets and reports.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
Yeah.
One of the first things that jumped out from the analysis is just how reliant the U.S. has become on other countries for really essential goods.
Yeah.
And the data, well, it paints a pretty stark picture. Some significant dependencies, especially when you look at imports coming from China.
It's quite striking, the depth of the reliance in certain key areas. I mean, we're talking dependency rates over 50%.
50%, wow. In what kind of sectors?
In sectors that are absolutely fundamental, so semiconductors, for instance, the brains behind pretty much all modern tech.
Right, critical.
Then you've got medical devices, obviously vital for a resilient healthcare system. Clean energy components, crucial if we want genuine energy independence.
Can't rely on others for that.
Exactly. And critical minerals. These are elements you absolutely need for everything from batteries to advanced electronics, defense systems. The list goes on. Plus, just a whole broad range of key electronics that underpin our economy and, importantly, our national security infrastructure.
And the risk here is it's way more than just a potential shipping delay, isn't it?
Yeah.
These dependencies open us up to some serious vulnerabilities, especially from a national security standpoint.
Precisely. If you connect the dots, relying so heavily on imports, particularly from specific regions, makes us vulnerable in several ways. I mean, just imagine a scenario.
Like what?
Well, imagine access to a key component for a medical device suddenly gets restricted because of, say, geopolitical tensions. Or think about the risk of cyber attacks targeting these long, complex global supply chains. These aren't just, hypothetical worries anymore. They're real risks we need to manage.
Okay, so that brings us to the response, this big push towards onshoring. And a key piece of that seems to be something called the Onshoring Initiative Framework. What's the core idea there?
Yeah, think of the Onshoring Initiative Framework as a comprehensive strategy. But it's dynamic. It's designed to empower U.S. agencies, established industries, and crucially, entrepreneurs like you listening now.
So it's not just about identifying the problem.
No, not at all. It's about providing the tools to fix them. Real-time data on where our import dependencies are sharpest. AI-powered tools that actually map out where domestic capabilities can be built up.
AI-driven mapping. Okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah, it helps identify sort of fertile ground for new domestic production based on existing strengths, workforce skills, infrastructure. And there's a really strong emphasis, too, on building the skilled workforce we need to support these growing domestic industries.
So it's not just a report that sits on a shelf. It's meant to be actively used, constantly updated.
Exactly right. It's designed as a living infrastructure, always being updated with the latest intel, adapting to the changing global picture. The end goal is pretty clear. Sustain national strength, economic prosperity, all built on a revitalized domestic industrial base in these really strategic sectors.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for our listeners, I think.
Yeah.
Because this framework doesn't just paint a broad picture. You're saying it actually points to specific regional strengths that entrepreneurs can tap into for onshoring in these critical areas.
That's the really practical part. It recognizes that, different parts of the U.S. have different advantages, different expertise already in place.
So can you give us a quick tour? Where are these hotspots?
Sure, let's start down in the Southwest, thinking Arizona, Texas, New Mexico. This area is booming as a major hub for semiconductors, EVs, electric vehicles, and solar energy.
Right. We hear a lot about the chip factories in Arizona, the
Yeah.
EV push in Texas.
Exactly. So for entrepreneurs, that means opportunities right across the supply chain, making specialized components, providing specific services, logistics, you name it.
Okay, what about the more traditional manufacturing heartlands? The Midwest.
Yeah, the Midwest, the Rust Belt, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, they're leveraging that long history in automotive, absolutely, but it's evolving fast.
How so?
We're seeing a huge focus not just on traditional auto, but also the EV sector, battery production, a big one, medical devices, and adopting advanced manufacturing techniques. So entrepreneurs there can plug into existing infrastructure and a really skilled, experienced workforce.
And the Southeast. That region's seen a lot of growth lately, too.
Absolutely. The Southeast, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina is really emerging as a powerhouse. EVs, again, clean energy tech, and also aerospace. Lots of potential for entrepreneurs supplying these growing industries, building out the support systems they need.
Okay, let's jump over to the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest.
Right. The Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Idaho. They have a strong established base in semiconductors, partly thanks to major players already being there, plus a great talent pool. They're also really leaning into their hydropower advantages and focusing on advanced materials development.
Advanced materials. Getting crucial for defense and
That's
other
right.
areas, right?
Increasingly so, yes. Then you have the Northeast Corridor. Dense population, lots of activity.
New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts.
Exactly. New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut. Big concentration in semiconductors there, too, especially on the R&D side. Plus, it's a major hub for biotech and medical device manufacturing, so opportunities in really high-tech, specialized manufacturing and cutting-edge innovation.
It's good that areas like Appalachia are also part of this picture.
Definitely. Appalachia parts of western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia is being highlighted for its existing manufacturing workforce. And there are growing clusters in medtech.
So leveraging that workforce.
Precisely. Leveraging that workforce for onshoring, particularly in manufacturing medical devices and related supplies. And even California. While, yes, operating costs can be higher, it's still a leader in biotech, clean tech, aerospace, EVs. Opportunities there are often more specialized, maybe focused on innovation, early stage development.
So the takeaway is across all these different regions, there are specific niches, specific areas where American entrepreneurs right now in mid-2025 can step in and directly help bolster national security through onshoring.
That's exactly it. And
Yeah.
to make it even more concrete, let's look at some specific vulnerabilities that pop out when you analyze the U.S.-China import data.
Right.
This is where we can really pinpoint product categories that represent immediate, tangible onshoring opportunities for American businesses today.
All right, lay some of those out for us. Where are the biggest import volumes, the biggest needs?
Well, electronics are consistently near the top. Take smartphones, that's harmonized system code 8517 if you're into the trade classifications. We import tens of billions of dollars worth every year.
Tens of billions, wow.
Same story for computers, data processing machines, HS code 8471. Now look, fully onshoring the final assembly of an iPhone tomorrow, that's a huge challenge.
Understatement.
Right. But entrepreneurs could focus on manufacturing key components domestically. Or developing more secure alternative, perhaps. Or targeting specialized niches within those massive markets.
That makes sense. Find a piece of the puzzle you can solve here.
Mm.
What about healthcare? That's always critical.
Absolutely critical. Medical devices. We urgently need more resilient domestic production lines. Think diagnostic test kits, PPE. We learned that lesson recently, didn't we?
We certainly did.
And beyond that, there's a real need for incentives to bring back domestic production of printed circuit boards, microelectronics, specifically for medical use. We're already seeing regional clusters emerge or strengthen: Midwest, Northeast, Southeast, Appalachia, Great Lakes that entrepreneurs could build upon.
And what about industries directly tied to defense? Aerospace.
Yeah, in aerospace and defense, the import data flags some crucial gaps. We're short on high-grade alloys from domestic suppliers. We have limited capacity for essential castings and forgings.
Things you definitely need for advanced hardware.
Things you definitely need. And we're often reliant on single foreign sources for critical chemical compounds. So this points to opportunities for investment, for innovation in domestic metals, new foundries. Plus, there's the reliance on imported commercial electronic parts, PCBs, resistors, diodes, even for defense applications. That's a potential weakness domestic manufacturers can absolutely help fix.
The clean energy sector seems like such an obvious win for onshoring. Energy independence, environmental benefits.
It really is. And it's almost ironic how much of our solar panels, wind turbines, batteries are currently made overseas. Onshoring that production doesn't just boost energy independence, it could actually be better environmentally, given potentially cleaner U.S. manufacturing standards. And you mentioned the battery belt earlier, that emerging area in the Southeast and Midwest. Tremendous opportunities there, not just making the battery cells themselves, but the whole supply chain. Anode materials, cathode materials, processing.
Critical minerals is another term we hear constantly. Rare earths.
Yes, absolutely. Our current dependence on imports for rare earth elements is a significant strategic vulnerability, no question. Now, there are efforts underway to build a domestic supply chain.
But it's slow going.
It takes time, and a major bottleneck right now is processing capacity here in the U.S. So entrepreneurs with expertise in mineral processing, sustainable extraction methods, there's a vital role for them to fill that gap.
And pharmaceuticals. We saw supply chain issues there, too.
We did. The high reliance on imported APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, the core chemicals and medicines is a major concern. The U.S. just doesn't have a dominant domestic API manufacturing base right now.
Which leaves us vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. So building new API plants or expanding existing ones domestically, that's a substantial opportunity for entrepreneurs in the pharma sector.
Okay, one more area. Drones. Rapidly growing, big national security implications.
And definitely. The U.S. is strong on the innovation side, the software, the AI for drones. But we lag in cost-effective hardware integration and manufacturing efficiency.
Especially the smaller parts.
Exactly. Small motors, specific electronic components, entrepreneurs who can bridge that gap set up robust domestic manufacturing for drone parts. They're tapping into a huge expanding market, both defense and commercial.
So it's crystal clear there are very specific needs across a whole range of critical sectors. Now, you mentioned the Onshoring Initiative Framework highlights something else, this idea of mutual human-AI refinement. Can you unpack that? What does it mean, and why is it important for national security?
Yeah, this is a really interesting angle. It's about contrasting our approach with, say, manufacturing philosophies elsewhere that might prioritize full automation, potentially leading to de-skilling the workforce over time. The American model, as it's being framed, really emphasizes creating a synergy, a partnership where AI and human workers learn from each other, continuously enhancing each other's capabilities.
How does that work in practice?
Well, AI can massively improve workforce training, boost efficiency, help workers upskill faster. But crucially, the human workers provide essential real-world feedback. They adapt the AI to practical, messy situations, and they bring nuanced, value-based judgments that algorithms just can't replicate.
Right. The human element.
Yeah.
And how does that specific approach bolster national security?
If you connect it back, this mutual refinement fosters a much more dynamic, more resilient industrial base. Your human workers retain core skills, adaptability, creative problem solving, even as the tech zooms ahead. It also promotes decentralized redundancy. Critical knowledge isn't just locked away in software, it's distributed across a skilled, adaptable workforce.
So less risk if one system fails.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, it builds regenerative capacity. If there's a crisis, a nation with a skilled, adaptable workforce can rebuild, retool, train the next generation much more readily than one totally reliant on external suppliers or super specialized, hard-to-replace expertise.
And that creates opportunities for tech entrepreneurs too, right? Building those AI tools.
Big time. Huge opportunities in developing the AI-powered tools and platforms that actually facilitate this upskilling, this enhancement of domestic manufacturing. So for those of you listening in the tech space, there's a definite role here.
Okay, let's talk support. For the entrepreneurs listening thinking, okay, I see the need, I have an idea, what kind of help can they actually expect from the government? It sounds like there are quite a few programs now.
There are, yeah. Several key federal initiatives are specifically designed to incentivize and support these onshoring efforts. The CHIP PS and Science Act is probably the most famous one. Huge funding for semiconductor manufacturing and related R&D. Then there's the Inflation Reduction Act, which offers significant tax credits aimed squarely at boosting clean energy manufacturing. That covers battery components, critical mineral processing, solar, wind.
And what about making sure there's actually a market for U.S.-made goods? Is there help there?
Good question. That's where policies like the Buy American Act and the newer Build America, Buy America Act kick in. They essentially give preference to domestic products in federal government purchasing and federally funded infrastructure projects.
So building roads, bridges, they need to use American materials.
Increasingly so. And importantly, the requirements for what counts as domestic content are getting stricter over time. That creates a more reliable, growing market for U.S. manufacturers.
Is this support mainly for the big guys, the huge corporations, or can smaller businesses tap into this too?
No, definitely not just the big guys. Programs like the SBIR Small Business Innovation Research and STTR grants are crucial. They provide early-stage funding for small businesses developing new tech here in the U.S.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Plus, the government is setting up regional innovation and technology hubs across the country. Think local centers for innovation, manufacturing excellence. And don't forget the Manufacturing USA Institutes. These are public-private R&D hubs focused on advanced manufacturing tech. Even in agriculture, there's the USDA Fertilizer Production Expansion Program offering grants to boost domestic production.
So it sounds like a layered approach. If you're an entrepreneur making, say, battery components in the Southeast,
You could potentially leverage IRA tax credits, maybe get an SBIR grant for an innovative process, and benefit from Buy American creating demand. It's about stacking the support.
and are states and cities getting involved too, offering their own incentives?
Yo, absolutely. Many state and local governments have their own incentive packages. Tax breaks, direct grants, credits for specific sectors. You really need to check locally. Louisiana, for example, has its industrial tax exemption. New York has its Green Sheet HEPS program, specifically targeting semiconductor and clean tech plants.
So homework for entrepreneurs. Check federal and state resources.
Definitely. Investigate the specific incentives available in the regions that make sense for your business.
Okay, but let's be realistic. Bringing manufacturing back or starting it here, it's not all easy, right? What are the main challenges entrepreneurs are likely to face?
No, it's definitely not without hurdles. A big one is often access to capital, financing, especially for small and medium businesses trying to get into capital-intensive sectors like chips or batteries.
Right, building a factory isn't cheap.
Exactly. But SBA loan guarantee programs can help. And we are seeing growing interest from venture capital in these strategic sectors, which is positive.
What else?
Skill gaps. That's another significant challenge. Finding enough workers with the right skills from semiconductor fabs, advanced pharma manufacturing, battery production.
But that's also an opportunity, isn't it? For training providers.
Absolutely. Direct opportunities for entrepreneurs in workforce training and development, and a real need for businesses to partner closely with community colleges, universities, technical schools to build those talent pipelines. Federal programs, DOL apprenticeships, DOE workforce initiatives are also trying to tackle this.
What about red tape? Regulations?
Yeah, regulatory hurdles can be a factor. Permitting processes can be complex. Environmental regs, FDA approvals if you're in medical, it can be daunting.
Any effort to streamline that?
There are ongoing efforts, yes, to provide clearer guidance, maybe even dedicated government liaisons to help businesses navigate the process more efficiently. And finally, technology and IP security. That's huge.
Especially with sensitive technologies.
Crucial for U.S. manufacturing. Robust cybersecurity isn't optional, even for small manufacturers. But there are cost-effective strategies, free resources available to help.
Okay, one last point that often comes up is cost. Isn't it just cheaper to make things overseas?
That's the common perception, but it's often based on a narrow view of cost. While yes, initial labor or material costs might seem higher here, you have to look at the total cost of ownership, TCO, meaning you factor in everything: complex global logistics, tariffs, the very real risk of your intellectual property being stolen overseas, potential quality control headaches with distant suppliers.
Well,
When you add all that up, domestic manufacturing can actually be significantly more competitive overall. Plus, you get other advantages: faster innovation cycles, tighter control over quality, quicker response to market changes. Those have real strategic value.
so bringing it all together for our listeners, tuning in today, May 21st, 2025.
Yeah.
What's the fundamental message for American entrepreneurs looking at onshoring?
The core message is this. Right now, today, there are significant, real, timely opportunities for you as American entrepreneurs to make a direct, meaningful contribution to U.S. national security. And you can do it through strategic onshoring.
And these aren't just vague opportunities, they're specific, across different sectors, different regions.
Exactly. They span a diverse range of industries, they align with existing U.S. strengths, and they directly tackle critical vulnerabilities we've identified in our essential supply chains.
And those challenges we just talked about, the financing, the skills gap, the regulations.
You should view those challenges not just as roadblocks, but actually as fertile ground. They are areas where innovative solutions, new businesses, your entrepreneurial drive, that's precisely what's needed to overcome them and build a stronger domestic industrial base.
So where should someone start if they're listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to explore this? What are the first steps?
We've mentioned several key resources. The SBA has dedicated onshoring portals, good starting point. The NIST MEP Center's Manufacturing Extension Partnership offer amazing on-the-ground support for smaller manufacturers, nationwide network.
Right, the MEPs.
The Manufacturing USA Institutes give access to cutting-edge R&D collaboration opportunities, and definitely don't overlook state and local economic development agency websites. They'll have specifics on local incentives and support.
So if you're, say, an electronics manufacturing expert,
A good first step might be checking out your regional NIST MEP center and then researching state-level incentives for advanced manufacturing in your target location.
okay, so the call to action for American entrepreneurs today seems pretty clear.
It really is. By focusing your energy on building resilience, driving innovation, and strategically aligning your business, whether it's existing or one you're planning, with these critical national needs,
Hmm.
you have this unique chance. You can build a thriving, successful business while at the same time strengthening America's security and economic sovereignty for years to come.
So the final thought for everyone listening.
Take some time after this. Really consider how your skills, your passion, your current or future business venture might fit into this vital national effort. Because the time to act, the time to build is definitely now. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, could be articles, research papers, even your own notes, and we really try to cut through all the noise to pull out the most important bits, the key nuggets of knowledge. Think of it as your shortcut to getting genuinely well-informed on some pretty complex topics. Today, we're diving deep into the U.S. Onshoring Initiative, and we're basing this entirely on the source material that you provided. This isn't just some buzzword flying around. It's a huge, really multifaceted strategic push. Our goal here is simple. Help you quickly get a handle on the core ideas, the challenges, the opportunities, and what it all really means, all straight from those sources.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating when you look at the detail in your material. It gets right into the why this is happening now, the urgency, but also the really complex how they plan to do it. It can seem like a lot at first glance, I admit, but the framework your sources lay out, it actually gives us a pretty structured way to understand the whole thing.
Okay, great. Let's start unpacking it then. The sources seem pretty direct right from the get-go about why this is such a big focus now. What's the fundamental problem they're flagging?
Well, the core issue they really hammer home is this persistent and, frankly, high level of dependency the U.S. still has on foreign imports. And not just for anything, but specifically for products that are considered strategic or critical.
Right, and we're not talking about, everyday consumer goods necessarily. The sources call out very specific sectors, don't they? Things like semiconductors,
Yeah.
medical devices.
Exactly. Semiconductors, medical devices, components for clean energy tech, critical minerals, that's a big one, and electronics generally.
And the scale of this dependency, the sources give numbers, right?
They do, and it's pretty striking. Your sources point to reliance rates over 50% for a lot of these categories. But here's a really key point from the material. For some critical minerals, that dependency actually hits 100%.
Wow, 100%. Sourcing something absolutely critical entirely from abroad, it sounds like a major vulnerability, not just normal trade.
That's precisely the argument the sources make. This level of reliance isn't just an economic thing. It exposes the U.S. to really significant security risks, resilience risks. We're talking potential supply chain shocks, vulnerability if geopolitics get unstable, even cyber threats are mentioned. And the material makes a specific point about how suppliers, maybe adversarial ones, can actually exploit this using export restrictions. They cite examples like rare earths or certain drone components. This isn't just theory. The sources show it's happened.
Okay, so the main driver here, according to your sources, it isn't just some vague idea of bringing jobs back. It's presented as a fundamental strategic necessity for national security, for economic stability. Now, the material you gave us really drills down into how these vulnerabilities look different depending on the sector. Can you maybe highlight a few specific examples the sources detail?
Absolutely. The weak spots, they really do vary by industry. Let's take semiconductors first. The sources get specific about risks like IP theft and intellectual property.
Right.
Right? That can happen through these really complex global supply chains or even insiders. They also flag malware risks, specifically on the sensitive design workstations, the CAD workstations where the chip blueprints are made. There are risks with older legacy manufacturing gear and even the scary possibility of hardware Trojans, malicious bits hidden inside components. And of course, the big one, that fundamental reliance on foreign factories, the fabs, for actually making the advanced chips.
Yeah.
That's a major vulnerability cited.
That is incredibly specific. What about pharma? The sources mentioned active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs.
Yeah, pharma's highlighted for a particularly high import reliance in the sources. They say about 77% of key ingredients, the APIs, are sourced overseas. And the COVID pandemic, well, that was a stark wake-up call, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The sources point to shortages driven directly by that dependency. Now, the U.S. does have some history here, legacy production areas. The sources mention places like New Jersey, Puerto Rico, North Carolina, Illinois.
Yeah.
But they also note the capacity, especially for generic drugs, is often limited compared to what we need now. Though they do point to some positive examples mentioned in your material, like that Flow Corporation and Civico RX effort down in Virginia, and Pfizer has API sites too, like the one in Kalamazoo, Michigan that made vaccine inputs.
So some domestic capability exists, but maybe not the scale or the breadth needed. Okay, drones were another one you flagged. How does the vulnerability show up there, according to the sources?
For drones, it's an interesting picture the sources paint. The U.S. apparently leads in the software and the really high-end military drone tech. But there's a big gap identified when it comes to producing the hardware components cost-effectively for smaller, more common drones, things like the little motors, the cameras, and just overall manufacturing efficiency compared to, say, China. So that leads to relying on foreign electronics components for those more affordable systems that are widely used.
Right, and energy infrastructure. That feels particularly raw after some recent events. What do your sources pinpoint there?
Yeah, the energy sector's reliance on foreign parts, transformers, batteries, control systems that gets highlighted. And the sources explicitly link this to how vulnerable global shipping is. They use the Suez Canal blockage as a concrete example of how a disruption way over there can hit home. And closer to home, pipelines are vulnerable. The Colonial Pipeline cyber attack proved that. The sources also point to a high risk of both cyber and physical attacks, specifically citing the discovery of that China-linked malware, Volt Typhoon, in critical infrastructure as a recent very serious concern.
Volt Typhoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that name definitely sends a shiver. Okay, last one, you mentioned medical devices.
Medical devices also lean heavily on overseas manufacturing for components, especially things like plastics and electronics used in lower cost, maybe higher volume items. And given what these products do, life-saving, life-supporting the sources really stress that strong IP protection and security across the entire supply chain are absolutely critical.
Okay, it's clear these aren't just vague worries. Your sources lay out very specific, detailed vulnerabilities across a whole range of vital sectors. So, given this picture of dependency and risk, how exactly do the sources say the U.S. plans to tackle this? They talk about a framework.
They do. The sources introduce this Onshoring Initiative framework as the strategic response. It's really designed to empower U.S. agencies, industry entrepreneurs, give them a more coordinated, data-driven approach. They actually describe it as kind of living infrastructure, one that uses real-time data and, interestingly, AI-driven mapping.
A living infrastructure. That sounds pretty dynamic. What kinds of data points and tools are actually involved in this framework based on the sources?
Well, key tools and metrics they cite include an import dependency dashboard, often using HS codes, those harmonized system codes, which lets them get really granular, pinpointing dependency down to the specific product level. They also talk about mapping market gaps, identifying exactly where the opportunities are for domestic production, and mapping the existing workforce training and credentialing landscape. The whole point seems to be creating actionable intelligence that connects the dots between data, policy, and actually getting things done.
And there was that interesting concept in there, the U.S. advantage, linked to mutual human AI refinement. That phrase definitely jumped out.
It's a really fascinating point in the sources. Instead of seeing AI and automation as just, de-skilling workers, they frame the U.S. approach as this mutual human AI refinement.
Yeah.
The idea is AI refines labor through better training, upskilling, making things more efficient, while humans are still crucial. They provide feedback, they adapt when things go wrong, they guide the AI based on values in real-world messy context.
So less about robots replacing people, more about a partnership.
Exactly. And the sources use this pretty stark scenario to explain why keeping humans skilled is so vital for resilience. They say, imagine a massive solar flare knocks out the grid, takes down automated systems. A nation that had totally de-skilled its workforce become completely reliant on automation, while they face a huge crisis, lacking the basic human knowledge to rebuild manually. But the U.S. model, by aiming to keep this sort of decentralized redundancy in human skills, fosters resilience. People can rebuild, adapt, teach the next generation, even if the high-tech stuff fails. It's a strategic argument for keeping those hands-on skills alive.
That really hits home. It underscores the importance of not just the fancy machines, but the people who actually know how to build things, fix things.
Right. So beyond identifying the problems and this data framework, your sources also point to existing U.S. strengths, right? Specific regional advantages for onshoring.
Yes, absolutely. The analysis presented in the sources identifies specific areas in the U.S. that already have, relevant infrastructure, existing supply chain clusters, pools of talent, places that are particularly well-suited to attract certain kinds of onshoring projects.
They listed quite a few, I think 11 regions. Without going through the whole list, can you give us a couple of examples from the sources, which regions and what kinds of sectors they're strong in? Sure. Your sources highlight, for instance, the Southwest, that states like Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, pointing to strengths in semiconductors, electric vehicles, EVs, and solar energy. Then there's the Midwest, the Rust Belt region, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, noted for its strong base in automotive, but also batteries, medical devices, and advanced manufacturing generally. The Southeast is another one, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, seen as strong in EVs, clean energy manufacturing, and aerospace. And California, of course, highlighted for biotech, clean tech, aerospace, and EVs as well.
So the framework uses this data to kind of surface these existing strengths, to guide companies to places where they might have a better shot at success.
Precisely. It helps connect the dots for entrepreneurs and industry, pointing them towards regions with a potential head start.
But even with those regional strengths, bringing manufacturing back, it still faces big hurdles, doesn't it? Costs, finding enough skilled people, regulations. What do your sources say about tackling those obstacles?
Oh, absolutely. Those are major challenges, and your sources definitely spend time on them. A big one they discuss is cost, specifically looking at the total cost of ownership, or PCO.
Right, TCO. That's more than just the sticker price or the labor cost difference, isn't it? I remember the sources mentioning how much lower wages can be overseas.
Much lower, yeah. The sources cite figures like wages in parts of Asia being 4 to 10 times lower than in the U.S. But the key point the sources make is that TCO is way more complicated than just comparing labor rates. It has to include things like logistics, shipping costs, tariffs, the very real risk of your IP getting stolen, maybe losing innovation potential by being far from R&D, the capital cost to build here, and this is a big one, environmental compliance costs. Those have often been much lower overseas because of, well, looser regulations.
Okay, so when you factor all of that in, what's the bottom line according to the sources? Can the U.S. compete?
The sources find that, yes, while the upfront cost might be higher, when you look at the total cost and factor in the incentives now available, U.S. production can actually get close to cost parity in some cases. Or at least the premium might be justifiable because you're getting more security, more stability, shorter supply lines. They use examples. Semiconductor TCO looks high initially, but the CHEPS Act incentives narrow that gap considerably. Or for things like agrochemicals or pharma ingredients, a big reason production moved overseas was those lower capital and environmental costs, a gap the U.S. now needs to address with policy.
That makes sense. The true cost includes risks and hidden factors. What about just finding the money? Building these advanced facilities sounds incredibly expensive.
That's definitely flagged as another major hurdle: capital and financing gaps. Reshoring, especially for high-tech stuff, is hugely capital-intensive. We're talking tens of billions for a cutting-edge chip fab, billions for a big battery plant, even hundreds of millions for a specialty chemical or API facility. And while the really big headline-grabbing projects might attract investment, often helped by those big federal subsidies like CHIPS or the IRA, the sources point out that the smaller and medium-sized companies, the SMEs that are crucial suppliers, they often struggle to get the financing they need. So the sources suggest that targeted support, maybe through the SBA or the Economic Development Administration, EDA, is really vital for those smaller players in the chain.
And then the people. We talked about the strategic value of human skills, but the sources also sound the alarm about a serious skills gap, right?
They absolutely do. The skills gap comes up again and again in your sources as a critical bottleneck. Decades of offshoring meant, well, we didn't invest in training that kind of manufacturing talent here. The sources cite stats like a 43% drop in U.S. semiconductor manufacturing jobs between 2001 and 2020. So now, as companies announce new plants, there's this acute shortage of trained technicians. Engineers, one source estimated over 67,000 more needed just in semis by 2030, plus process chemists, other specialized roles.
So it's not just a numbers game, it's about very specific technical skills being missing.
Exactly. The sources get specific, needing people trained in GMP, good manufacturing practices for pharma, welding and precision machining for aerospace and defense, highly specialized chemical and process engineers for battery plants. Rebuilding that human capital pipeline is presented as a major piece of the puzzle.
Okay, it sounds like bridging all these gaps, cost, capital, skills, it's going to take a lot of support. What kind of toolkit, what kind of incentives do the sources say are being put in place to actually make onshoring happen?
Your sources detail a pretty comprehensive arsenal of government support, actually, coming from both the federal and state levels. It's all designed to bridge those gaps we talked about and make producing stuff domestically more attractive, more feasible.
Okay, let's start federal. What are the big levers the government is pulling, according to the sources?
Well, a huge one is procurement power, basically, the government buying stuff. Laws like the Buy American Act, which is pushing up the required domestic content for federal purchases towards 75% by 2029. There's also the Build America, Buy America Act for infrastructure projects, and the Berry Amendment, which requires domestic sourcing for defense needs like textiles and food. The idea is to create significant guaranteed demand for American-made goods.
Makes sense. Use the government's wallet. What about taxes?
Big incentives there, too. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, has the 45X manufacturing credit. The sources say that effectively subsidizes about a third of the cost of making a battery cell here. The GPS Act has a big investment tax credit for semiconductor manufacturing gear. And there are other proposals, like boosting bonus depreciation to encourage companies to invest in new equipment.
So using tax policy to change the economics, is there direct funding too? Grants, loans?
Yes, a whole range of grants and loans. The GPS Act itself includes billions in direct funding for building new semiconductor fabs. The IRA has money for clean tech manufacturing facilities. The USDA is offering grants to boost domestic fertilizer production. You've also got SBA programs for small businesses, BARDA supporting pharma and biotech readiness, and Department of Energy loan programs for advanced energy tech. It's pretty broad.
And they mentioned some pilot programs as well, sort of testing grounds.
Yeah, things like the Regional Tech Hubs program that's trying to seed new innovation clusters focused on critical technologies across the country. There are the Manufacture USA Institutes, which bring together industry, academia, and government for R&D and workforce development, and programs like SBIR and STTR grants, which help small businesses with research and development. It's all part of this multi-pronged approach described in your sources.
That's a serious set of federal tools. What about the states and local governments? The sources hinted they're a big part of this too.
Oh, absolutely critical. Your sources mention the sheer number, something like 2,000 state-level incentive programs out there. These are really important because they complement the federal stuff, often providing support tailored to a specific region's strengths or a particular project's needs. They give examples linked to the industries we've discussed. How Georgia, for example, has landed massive battery investments, or North Carolina's long history of supporting biotech, Minnesota's focus on medtech. These state and local deals offer vital tax breaks, grants, help with infrastructure, specialized workforce training. They often make the difference in where a company decides to locate.
Right, it's a partnership between federal and state efforts. Okay, it's clear the money and policy incentives are there, but let's loop back to that crucial workforce issue. How do your sources suggest we actually build the pipeline of skilled people needed for all this?
Workforce development. Yeah, it's framed as absolutely foundational in your sources. You can't just build factories. You need the skilled teams to actually run them effectively and safely.
So what works? What successful models or approaches do the sources highlight?
They point to things like strong industry education partnerships. The example given is Intel working directly with community colleges in Ohio to train semiconductor technicians for their new plants there. Registered apprenticeships get a strong endorsement models like FAME for advanced manufacturing or Mass Bioed in the biotech space. Specialized certificates are also mentioned, like North Carolina's BioWork program, which gives people foundational skills for biotech manufacturing jobs pretty quickly. These seem effective at getting industry-ready talent out there. And the needs are very specific, as we discussed. Cleanroom techs for chip fabs, people trained in CGMP for biotech and pharma, engineers and techs for complex battery lines, precision assembly skills for aerospace, tech integration skills for agriculture tech, understanding quality systems like ISO 13485 for medical devices. It's specialized stuff.
So really targeting training for these specific in-demand roles, what policy recommendations do the sources make to speed this up, to build that workforce faster?
The recommendations laid out in the sources include things like dedicated federal funding for building and equipping training facilities, offering scholarships to draw students into these technical fields, really strengthening those industry education partnerships. Also, potentially making Pell Grants usable for high-quality, shorter-term technical programs, better leveraging programs for veterans and displaced workers, and crucially, integrating career pathways and technical education much earlier, even starting in K-12. And one key recommendation that comes up is actually requiring companies that get big federal incentives to also set up concrete workforce training partnerships, linking the money to the training.
That seems vital, connecting the investment dollars directly to building the human capital needed to make those investments succeed long term.
Okay, it really sounds like a massive, incredibly complex, multi-layered effort. You've got data, policy, huge amounts of funding, and maybe most critically, a focus on people and skills. It really is. Your sources provide this remarkably detailed map of how the U.S. is trying to move from just identifying these critical dependencies and vulnerabilities to actively using its regional strengths and deploying this huge array of tools, tax credits, government buying power, grants, workforce strategies, all aimed at encouraging reshoring and building up national resilience.
It really lays out a strategic blueprint, pulled right from your own material, for how the U.S. is attempting to execute this shift.
Exactly. And understanding this whole framework, as detailed in your sources, is really the key to grasping the sheer scale of the challenge that kicked this off and the comprehensive nature of the strategic response that's now unfolding.
So this deep dive was all about pulling out those most important insights from your source material on the U.S. onshoring initiative.
And what emerges is this picture of an initiative grounded in a very clear assessment of critical dependencies, trying to smartly map opportunities onto existing domestic strengths, and then deploying this complex mix of federal and state incentives alongside very targeted workforce development.
It's clearly a strategic response trying to build domestic capacity from the ground up in some areas, starting with identifying which specific products are too reliant on imports, all the way down to the nitty-gritty of what skills are needed on a factory floor and how to create programs to teach them.
Right. It spans that whole range, from the big picture economic and security drivers down to the very practical details of, say, capital access for a small supplier or the specific technical certifications someone needs.
Your sources definitely provide that detailed look at the mechanics intended to drive the shift and build resilience.
They do. They outline the economic reasons, the security reasons for bringing production home. But it does leave you thinking about a broader question, maybe a more provocative one that flows from the sources' analysis. The focus now is bringing production back. But what are the deeper, maybe longer-term implications for innovation itself and for global dynamics? What happens as manufacturing knowledge and capability potentially get more spread out globally, or maybe reconsolidated in new ways outside the old centers? What does this big shift really mean for how future industries are structured around the world?
That's definitely something to chew on long after this deep dive. Thanks for walking us through this today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a bit different, actually really targeted.
Yeah.
We're diving into the Onshoring Initiative Framework, but specifically for one person, Joseph J.M. Walker, who's based in Canton, Ohio. He's got this, well, incredible mix of skills.
Okay, interesting. So applying the big picture to a specific individual's situation.
Exactly. The mission really is twofold. First, pinpoint some immediate opportunities Joseph could jump on right there in Canton, given his background.
Right.
And second, kind of map out how he might prep for what's coming down the line economically.
Got it. Taking that national framework on manufacturing, supply chains, all that, and drilling right down.
Yeah.
It makes sense, especially for someone with such a, unique profile.
It really is unique. Let's just touch on it quickly. We're talking an MBA, top 3% nationally.
Wow.
Dual bachelor's, molecular biology and chemistry, plus a business degree with honors.
Okay, so deep science and business.
And then you add certifications in AI engineering from IBM, AI and healthcare from Stanford.
Both cutting-edge fields right now.
Right, and 20 years of consulting experience. Oh, and a commercial drone pilot license, Part 107, all based there in Canton.
That is quite the toolkit. Seriously diverse. So, all right, Canton, Ohio, Midwest. What does the framework say about immediate possibilities there?
Well, the framework really highlights regional strengths, doesn't it? And Canton sits smack dab in the Midwest Rust Belt.
Which the initiative points to as strong in automotive, batteries, medical devices, advanced manufacturing generally. That location is definitely key.
Okay, so let's connect the dots. His AI engineering certification, how does that mesh with those Midwest industries right now?
Good question. The framework talks a lot about industrial software and AI analytics. Basically, AI getting baked into manufacturing.
Like for what, specifically?
Think predicting machine breakdowns before they happen, predictive maintenance. That saves huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
Or building virtual copies of factories, digital twins to test changes without disrupting anything.
Oh.
Joseph's AI engineering cert. It puts him right in the conversation to help manufacturers do that stuff. There's a real need for that expertise.
Makes sense. And the AI and healthcare certification, how's the fit there locally?
Well, Ohio already has a pretty well-known medical device cluster. The framework flags that too.
Right.
So that's a direct line for him. Applying AI to medical devices, maybe smarter diagnostics built in, or using AI to make the manufacturing of those devices better, faster, cheaper.
Interesting. He's got certs in both the tech and the application area.
Exactly. It's a nice synergy. Definite immediate potential there.
Now, that 20 years of consulting, that feels like a major asset in this whole onshoring shift. How does he leverage that right now?
Hugely important. Look, manufacturers, especially in the Midwest, are figuring out how to deal with bringing production back, securing supply chains, adopting new tech. It's complex.
Yeah, I bet.
Someone with 2 decades of consulting experience, he can be the guide. The framework mentions rising cybersecurity threats in manufacturing, for example. He could advise smaller companies, maybe those without big IT teams, on locking things down, or just help them strategically figure out which AI tools make sense for them, how to implement them for reshoring. That business background is critical.
Yeah, the real-world experience.
Yeah.
And the drone license feels a bit specific, but maybe useful?
Oh, absolutely. The framework mentions drones popping up more in agriculture, crop monitoring, inspecting infrastructure like bridges, pipelines, logistics too. His Part 107 license means he's certified for commercial work immediately.
So he could offer services directly?
Yeah, specialized drone services for local farms, infrastructure companies, maybe even manufacturers need site surveys or security monitoring via drone. It's a direct asset.
Okay. Now, the framework mentions SME and entrepreneur opportunity mapping. Joseph apparently scored high on entrepreneurship. What's that about?
Right. SME means small and medium-sized enterprises. That mapping part of the framework is about finding market gaps, like real needs that aren't being met, perfect for smaller companies or startups.
For Joseph.
With his entrepreneurial bent, he could actively check out regional incubators, startup hubs in Ohio, see what gaps they're seeing, maybe through this mapping process. His diverse skills might be a perfect fit for one of those gaps, either as a consultant or maybe even his own venture.
Makes sense. One last thing for the today picture. Workforce training. The framework stresses that. Could he play a role?
I think so. With the MBA, the tech certs, he's got both the high-level view and the ground-level skills. He could definitely consult with, say, local community colleges or workforce boards.
On what kind of training?
Designing programs for the specific skills needed in advanced manufacturing or AI implementation, the very skills Ohio needs for these reshoring efforts to succeed. It leverages his background and helps the whole region.
Okay, wow. So quite a few concrete things he could pursue, like right now in Canton.
For sure, the alignment is pretty strong.
All right, let's shift gears then. Look towards the horizon. What trends does the Onshoring Initiative Framework highlight that Joseph should really be preparing for, thinking about for the future?
The big picture, looking ahead, is definitely this continued, even accelerating push to reshore critical industries.
Like what specifically?
Semiconductors are huge, obviously. Advanced batteries, medical devices still, and clean energy equipment, solar, wind components. This isn't just a blip. It's a major strategic shift.
And with that shift, especially bringing sensitive tech back, what becomes more important?
Technology security and protecting intellectual property, or IP, it's going to be massive, particularly for semiconductors, aerospace, defense contractors.
Because the risks are higher when it's domestic.
Well, the need to protect it becomes paramount because it's our critical tech base. The framework points out the dangers of relying on potentially unstable global suppliers. So cybersecurity for manufacturers, that demand is only going up.
So Joseph could lean into that.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity consulting, especially for smaller manufacturers in Ohio who might be vulnerable, that looks like a growth area.
The framework also has this interesting phrase, mutual human-AI refinement. What's the thinking there for the future?
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept. The idea is the U.S. advantage might not just be AI alone or human labor alone, but how they work together. Humans making AI better, AI augmenting human skills.
The feedback loop, kind of.
Exactly. And people like Joseph, with deep tech skills and business understanding, they're the bridge. They'll be crucial in figuring out how humans and AI actually collaborate effectively on the factory floor or in healthcare settings.
Okay. What about this battery belt we keep hearing about? Great Lakes, Southeast. Canton isn't quite ground zero, is it?
No, maybe not ground zero for the giant battery plants themselves, but the growth of that whole ecosystem across the Great Lakes, it creates huge ripples.
How so?
Think about all the suppliers needed: logistics, specialized consulting, services supporting the electric vehicle industry that those batteries feed. Joseph could definitely position himself to serve that wider regional growth, even from Canton.
And clean energy equipment manufacturing. You mentioned that earlier, too.
Right, another big onshoring push. Solar panels, wind turbine parts, more batteries. Joseph's AI background, maybe even his materials science knowledge from his chemistry degree, that could be really valuable for optimizing how that stuff gets made.
Makes sense. And the supply chain issues that, everyone felt the last few years, how does Joseph prepare for that continued focus on resilience?
The framework makes it clear. Companies are acutely aware of supply chain risks, now geopolitical issues, single-source dependencies. They want more resilience.
And Joseph's background helps how?
His diverse skill set is actually perfect for this. He understands tech, business, maybe even the science behind some materials. He could help Ohio businesses map their supply chains, find regional suppliers, use tech for better visibility, basically build stronger, more local networks.
Okay. And just thinking about factories themselves, more automation,
Right.
robotics.
Definitely. Advanced manufacturing keeps advancing. More automation, more robotics. Again, Joseph's AI skills fit right in. Factories of the future need people who get both the tech and the business case for using it. He's well positioned there.
Lastly, government incentives. Things like the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act. How important is it for him to track those?
Pretty important, I'd say. Federal and state governments are putting real money behind reshoring. Knowing the rules, knowing what incentives are available, that can open doors for consulting, helping companies tap into that funding, or even shaping his own entrepreneurial ideas to align with policy goals.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up for Joseph. Today, in Canton, leverage the AI certs in local manufacturing and medical devices. Use that deep consulting experience to guide businesses. Put the drone license to work. Explore those SME opportunities. Maybe start something. And help build the local skilled workforce. That's the now.
That sums up the immediate plays pretty well, yeah.
And looking ahead, prepare for more onshoring, especially in critical tech. Focus on tech security. Understand that human-AI partnership. Keep tabs on the battery belt ripple effects and clean energy manufacturing. Help build resilient supply chains. Stay sharp on advanced automation. And track those government policies.
Precisely. It's about using his really unique foundation to ride these big waves identified in the framework, his combination of skills in that specific region. It's a potent mix right now.
It really is. So on that note, here's a final thought really directed at you, the listener, especially if your profile resonates with Joseph's. Given such a diverse skill set, deep tech, science, business strategy, even aviation, and this whole manufacturing renaissance happening, particularly in places like the Midwest. How could you uniquely blend those seemingly separate pieces? What unexpected combinations of your expertise could create something totally new, something high impact, right there in a place like Canton? What could you build in this evolving landscape? Definitely something to think about.
A great question.
Join us next time for another Deep Dive. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, articles, reports, all that stuff, and really dig in to pull out what matters. We're here to help you cut through the noise, maybe find some clarity. And today, we're diving into something really relevant. This whole push to bring manufacturing, those critical industries, back here to the U.S. You hear it called onshoring. And we're really focusing this for you. Maybe you're just out of high school, figuring out what's next. You're curious, maybe like working with your hands, looking for something with purpose.
Exactly. We've been through the sources you sent over, industry reports, government docs, research. And yeah, they show a really interesting pattern, growing opportunities right here.
And things like manufacturing, clean energy, defense.
Yeah, advanced manufacturing, clean energy defense, biotech too,
Yeah.
all happening stateside.
Okay. So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack what these sources are saying. Like, where are these jobs physically? What kind of work is it really? What skills do you actually need?
And crucially, how you can get those skills, especially thinking about paths that aren't, the standard 4-year university route right off the bat.
All right, let's jump in then. Big question first. Why now? Why this shift back to the U.S. companies spent decades moving production overseas? So what's driving this onshoring thing, according to the sources?
Well, the sources are pretty consistent on this. It's a fundamental rethink. It's being driven by resilience, by security. It's not just about cost anymore.
Okay.
The U.S. sort of woke up to the fact that it had become really, really dependent on foreign imports for critical things. We're talking semiconductors, chips, you know,
big topic.
huge. Then medical supplies, parts for clean energy like solar panels and wind turbines, even basic raw materials, critical minerals.
And this dependency, the sources say it was pretty high.
Oh, extremely high. For some of these critical products, the sources mention dependency rates over 50%, sometimes way over.
Wow.
And that leaves the supply chain vulnerable, which means the economy, even national security, is vulnerable. We saw that play out during the pandemic, right? Shortages of masks, medicines.
Yeah, definitely felt that.
So the sources point to those kinds of risks, geopolitical issues, just basic supply chain hiccups, but also more complex stuff like cyber attacks on automated factories.
I remember reading that one bit, it was kind of chilling, about a de-skilled nation. Like, if a solar flare knocked out automation, would we even have the people with hands-on skills left to fix things?
Exactly. That really hits the nail on the head. It underscores the risk of losing that practical capability, and that's central to the why now for onshoring. It's shifted.
So it's not just about finding the cheapest place to make things anymore.
Right. Companies and policymakers, according to these sources, are looking more at the total cost of ownership. That means factoring in reliability, security, protecting ideas, quality control.
Makes sense.
And even being able to innovate faster when your design teams and your manufacturing are close together. So onshoring is seen as strategic. It's about building what some sources call generational security, real resilience.
Okay. That explains the why. So let's get practical for someone thinking, okay, what does this mean for me?
Yeah.
If companies are bringing production back, where in the U.S. are these opportunities actually popping up?
Yeah, good question. The sources make it clear it's not spread evenly, it's concentrating in specific regional hotspots, often building on, existing strengths or resources.
Okay, so paint us a picture. Where are these hotspots?
All right. We see a lot happening in the Southwest. Think Arizona, Texas, New Mexico. That area is becoming a real hub for semiconductors. Also EVs, electric vehicles, and solar. Lots of chip plants, big solar projects going in there.
This is sunshine. Okay.
Yeah, it kind of sums it up. Then you look at the traditional Midwest, the Rust Belt, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin. They're building on their auto history.
Right.
They're becoming really strong in battery manufacturing for EVs, also medical devices, and just broader advanced manufacturing, kind of a comeback story there. Then the Southeast Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, another really high growth zone. Again, EVs, other clean energy stuff, and aerospace too.
Okay, covering a lot of ground. What about the coasts?
Up in the Pacific Northwest, so Oregon, Washington, Idaho, they've got semiconductor strength too, but also industries powered by their hydro resources and advanced materials.
And the Northeast Corridor.
Yep. The Northeast, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut. Strong in high tech, like semiconductors again, biotech, medical devices. Also interesting, the sources mention Appalachia, parts of western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, using their existing manufacturing workforce for new things like medtech.
Huh. What about the middle of the country?
The Great Plains states like Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, they're key for wind energy components, ag tech, that's agricultural technology and food processing. And you can't forget California. Big player across the board, biotech, clean tech, aerospace, EVs. Southern California, especially LA, is huge for aerospace, electronics, and it's a major gateway for imports, which is kind of interesting when you're talking about bringing things back home, managing those supply lines. And finally, the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, still vital for energy, obviously, but also port logistics and heavy manufacturing. The Mountain West gets mentioned, but the specific industries weren't detailed in the stuff we reviewed.
Wow, okay. That is a lot of regions. So for you, thinking about where to look, the takeaway is Check out what's booming in these specific states and regions. See what's near you, or maybe where you'd be willing to relocate. It gives you a starting point.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating digging into the sources is the kind of work available in these sectors. Because these are often really technical roles. They need specific skills.
But maybe not always a 4-year degree right away.
That's the key point. Often not. Let's talk about some of those sectors.
Yeah, I'll do that. What kind of jobs could someone starting out actually look into?
Okay, let's definitely start with semiconductors. Huge investment there, right? The CHIPS Act is pouring money in. Building those giant factories, the fabs, needs tons of construction workers, obviously.
Right.
But running them, that takes a specialized crew. We're talking about equipment technicians, the folks who keep those incredibly complex machines running, and process technicians who manage the manufacturing steps, often in those super clean environments, the clean rooms.
Sounds intense.
It requires serious technical training, but often that training comes from community colleges or specific programs, not necessarily a 4-year engineering degree to get started.
Yeah.
Think Intel, TSMC, Micron, like they need these people.
And batteries. You mentioned the battery belt. That sounds like massive growth for EVs and storing power.
Oh, absolutely massive. The sources point to this huge wave of investment creating a battery belt. Georgia, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Ohio, Nevada, South Carolina, Indiana, Kansas, Texas. It's a long list.
So jobs.
Yeah, jobs for battery manufacturing technicians, people working on assembly lines with advanced tools, and again, lots of construction to build the factories. And what's interesting is regions are scrambling to set up battery academies, quick training programs to fill these roles fast.
Okay. What about medical stuff? Devices, medicines. That feels really important, making that stuff here.
Critical, yeah. Bringing production of, say, complex medical devices or the active ingredients for medicines back home. That means jobs for people good at precision assembly. For quality control technicians, they're vital, making sure everything meets super strict standards. And process technicians in biomanufacturing.
Standards like GMP. I think I saw that.
Exactly. GMP, good manufacturing practice. That's a set of strict rules to ensure things like medicines are safe, pure, effective. And ISO 13485, that's a similar quality standard specifically for medical devices. Knowing about those is a big plus.
And there are specific training programs for this.
Yeah. The sources mention examples like the NC BioWork certificate in North Carolina. It's designed as a direct path into biotech manufacturing jobs. And you see companies like Flow Corp making essential medicines domestically, or Moderna scaling up vaccine production here. It's happening.
Okay. Aerospace and defense. Seems like that would need hands-on skills too.
Definitely. With increased spending there, there's more demand for manufacturing technicians, skilled machinists, people who operate those complex computer-controlled cutting tools, certified welders, electronics assemblers putting together components for planes, missiles, you name it.
And skills can transfer.
Yeah, that's a good point. The sources mention dual-use skills. So skills you learn making, say, commercial airplane parts might apply directly to defense projects. Gives you options. Big companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, SpaceX, they need this workforce.
Even drones. Not just flying them, but building them.
Right. The U.S. is strong on the software, the AI side of drones. But there's a push, according to the sources, to build more of the actual hardware, the motors, cameras, electronics domestically. So that means jobs for manufacturing techs and assembly workers.
And farming is getting techie too. Ag tech.
For sure. Modern farming ag tech is way more high-tech than people might realize. Precision agriculture uses robotics, sensors, drones, so you need technicians to maintain and operate that gear. And things like controlled environment agriculture, big vertical farms, high-tech greenhouses, they need people who understand complex systems for climate, nutrients.
So it's tech skills applied to farming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It merges tech skills with really practical hands-on work. It's about food security, ultimately. The big takeaway across all these sectors, these aren't necessarily low-skill jobs. They're skilled technical roles. They need focus, expertise, often hands-on ability. And they contribute to really important things: health, security, energy, food.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. If these jobs need specific skills, how do you actually get them? Especially if maybe 4 years of college right now isn't the plan. The sources mention this workforce gap, basically. Not enough skilled people for the jobs being created. That sounds like opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity, yes. And the sources really emphasize the pathways being built or strengthened to get these skills. Community colleges and technical schools are absolute powerhouses here.
How so?
They offer focus certificates, 2-year associate degrees that are directly tailored to what these industries need. You can find programs for semiconductor techs, Biotech operators, battery manufacturing, welding, advanced machining, CNC stuff, even drone repair.
Like the NC Biowork you mentioned?
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Or those battery programs popping up in the battery belt states. Even the FAA has programs linked with colleges for drone pilots and technicians. It's targeted practical training.
Gotcha. So very direct link to jobs. What else?
Another really strong path highlighted is apprenticeships. This is the classic earn while you learn model.
Right, get paid while you train.
Exactly. A company hires you, you get a wage, and you get structured training both on the job and often through related classes, maybe at a local college. And you usually come out with industry-recognized certifications.
Are there examples of those?
Yeah, the sources cited programs like FAME, which focuses on advanced manufacturing, and Mass Bioed for biotech apprenticeships. These are established models. And registered apprenticeships are nationally recognized, which is a big plus.
And certifications themselves, not just degrees, seem key.
Hugely important. In many of these fields, specific industry certifications are really valued. They prove you have a specific skill. Like NIM certifications for machining show you can run certain equipment. OSHA safety certs are vital anywhere in manufacturing. GWO for wind turbine techs, or the FAA Part 107 license if you want to fly drones commercially.
And you can get those through the college programs or on the job.
Both, often. Sometimes they're part of a certificate program. Sometimes companies will train you and help you get certified once you're hired.
So the big message is focus on getting practical, hands-on technical skills. And there are clear paths like community colleges, tech schools, apprenticeships that get you there without necessarily needing that 4-year degree up front.
That's absolutely the core message on the workforce side from these sources. And it's worth adding, government and industry are putting money into this. The Chile US Act has funds specifically for workforce training. Departments of Energy, Labor, Education, they have programs too. And companies are partnering directly with colleges to make sure the training matches the jobs. And maybe just briefly, beyond the direct training, the sources also mention the broader support systems, the things that actually create the demand for these jobs in the first place.
Right, like government policies.
Exactly. Things like Buy American rules, where the government has to prioritize buying U.S.-made goods. That creates a market. Or tax credits, like in the Inflation Reduction Act for making clean energy tech here, or the Chile US Act incentives for building semiconductor plants.
So those help the companies build here, which then creates the jobs.
Precisely. They fuel the demand. And programs like the NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership, MEP, they help smaller manufacturers adopt new tech and train their people. So they help sustain those jobs in smaller companies all over the country.
Okay. And those regional tech hubs.
Yeah, the EDA's Tech Hubs program, that's about seeding innovation in specific regions, which, again, creates a need for skilled workers down the line. So it's all connected, the incentives, the support, the training, the jobs.
Okay. So we've covered the why, the where, the what kind of work, and how to get the skills. Let's step back, the big picture. For someone starting out, maybe feeling a bit unsure about the future, what does this whole onshoring trend really mean?
Well, the sources suggest it's about more than just finding a job. It's potentially about being part of rebuilding something important. Resilient industries, secure supply chains, innovation happening here.
And maybe more stable careers. You mentioned companies thinking long-term now, not just cheapest labor.
That's definitely an implication from that total cost of ownership idea. If companies are investing strategically based on reliability and security, not just quarterly cost savings, then yeah, these onshore jobs are likely to be more stable, more foundational for a long-term career.
And what about purpose? You hear a lot about wanting work that feels meaningful.
Absolutely. These roles offer that, I think, a direct line to making tangible things that matter. Plus, the sources mention environmental aspects, too. Manufacturing here under U.S. regulations often means a lower carbon footprint, stricter pollution controls compared to some other places.
So you're building something essential, maybe even cleaner.
Yeah, you could be building components for national security, or making life-saving medicines or medical devices, or assembling the batteries and solar panels needed for clean energy. It connects your hands-on skills to these really big, important goals: health, security, energy independence, economic strength. That's pretty purposeful.
This has been really eye-opening. It sounds like the sources are painting a clear picture. There's a real growing wave of opportunity in U.S. manufacturing in these critical industries. And it seems especially relevant for you if you're hands-on, curious, looking for something practical and purposeful.
That's the definite takeaway. This trend is creating real demand for skilled people ready to train for these kinds of roles.
So the action steps seem pretty clear from this deep dive. For you listening, Explore those regional hotspots we discussed. See what's happening near you or where you might consider moving. And then really dig into the training options, community college programs, technical schools, apprenticeships, certifications. Those are your practical routes in. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, kind of summing up what these sources suggest. In a world that can feel pretty uncertain, maybe a little overwhelming sometimes, finding a path that uses your hands-on skills to build something real, something essential right here at home. That seems to offer not just a job, but a real sense of purpose and resilience for your future and maybe for the country's too. That wraps up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.